I want to tell you the story of the time I saved a guy from drowning. This was during the pandemic, and I was at Ocean Beach, which is the sort of city beach at the edge of San Francisco. It's a famously rough and kind of dangerous place, especially in the winter, and it's sort of beloved for surfers because the waves can be so huge. But this was the summer, and I am a surfer, but I'm not a very good surfer. I just like to sit out there in the waves and like watch the pelicans go by. And this was a very beautiful day and pretty chill as the waves go. But I'm sitting there and I suddenly can hear this kind of barking. And I just don't know what it is. It's the oddest sound. And I look over, and as the waves are kind of undulating next to me, I can see maybe 100 yards, 50 yards maybe down, a figure kind of in the water. And I'm like, is that a seal? It looks like an injured seal maybe? I don't know what it is. I was with a friend of mine, and the two of us paddle over, and we get closer and closer, and I begin to realize, oh, this is a person. This is a man on his back. And his face is up at the sky, and he's kind of barking at the sky. And I get, closer and closer to him, and there's that sort of social moment where you think to yourself, like, am I bothering this guy? Like, I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want to like get in his space. But I just sort of get this vibe. And as I paddle up to him, I paddle right up to him, and I say, are you okay? And he's on his back, looking at the sky, and he just barely looks over at me, and he goes, help. And I realize, oh, wow, this guy is totally out of gas. Like, I can suddenly see in his face that he is totally drained and is really about to go under. So I'm on a surfboard. It's a pretty big flotation device. And so I grab him. I pull him toward me, and he suddenly comes to life and grabs onto my back. And I can smell on him vomit. He's been throwing up out here because he's been so, I think, gassed for so long. And I can also smell a lot of booze. He's probably a little hungover, and he doesn't speak English. My guess would be he was Mongolian, but I don't know. And he didn't really speak English other than he could say help and thank you. He kept saying thank you. So we're paddling to shore, and the waves are kind of pushing us in. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle. We're having some trouble getting there. And as we get into the white water and up onto the sand, I see this lifeguard truck come ripping up toward us. And it does this kind of like cartoon stop. And this absolute just parody of a lifeguard leaps out of the driver's seat and comes running toward us. And I think to myself, yeah, basically, I sort of start to signal to him like, I got it. And I'm thinking to myself, he's going to come and like, give me a hug or something, that he was going to congratulate me with all of his heart, right? Instead, this guy on a pretty cold, a chilly summer day in San Francisco, he's got just swim trunks on and a t-shirt. He goes ripping past me. He doesn't even look in my direction, and flings his sunglasses back at the truck with a flotation device under his arm, and he goes into the waves. And I look back and I realize, oh, he's going for this little girl who is also being swept out. The guy I saved disappears. I don't see him again. But I watch this lifeguard go in and save person after person after person on this crazy day. And the thing that he was saving them from was the rip current. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because that is the name of this newsletter that I have just started publishing. And it's going to be a series I do here on YouTube to talk about the big issues that I've been covering as a journalist for the better part of 20 years. And the reason I'm calling it that is because a rip current, if you don't know, on the beach is basically this weird feature that develops where when waves are sort of coming up onto the beach and then rolling back out to sea in a particular way, they begin to form sometimes a trough, basically an underwater trench that develops its own flow of water such that it becomes this very powerful outgoing river. And that rip current is really hard to spot. It's incredibly complicated to see it properly. When you really get experienced, you can. But I'm still figuring it out. I still don't see them very well. And the difficulty is that they're really, this invisibility is what makes them so dangerous, because, a guy like this, right, a hungover guy just looking to, shake off the booze by being in some cold water for an afternoon with his friends, or a little girl splashing there, right, can be swept off their feet and suddenly taken way out very fast in a very deadly way. But here's the other thing, is that for surfers, a rip current can also be a total problem. I mean, I've been in situations before at Ocean Beach where a big, wide rip current, 40 or 50 feet wide, has taken me way out past where I meant to go. So it can be a real dangerous thing for surfers as well. But it's also an extremely useful thing under certain circumstances. So one of the things that you do when you go surfing is there's this sort of funny, I don't know if camaraderie is the word, because surfers are weird. You pull up to the parking lot, right? And it's typically very early in the morning, and you're standing with, a handful of other people, other surfers, and all of you are kind of squinting out at the waves. And in Northern California, you're squinting out at the sort of fog, and there's you're trying to figure out, are these the right waves? Is this the right conditions? What's the tide doing? Like, you're trying to figure out if it's worth getting your wetsuit on and going in and risking your life in these waves. And the conversation is always a little stilted. It's very early in the morning typically, everybody's a little grumpy anyway. But one of the conversations that I tend to have with people is I ask them, do you see the rip? Is there a rip? Because a rip current can have this magical effect on a surfing session where, plowing this like big, thick fiberglass and foam contraption, this surfboard, plowing it through the whitewater that's coming at you to get out to where you want to surf is exhausting. And in many cases can like burn up all of your energy before you've even really had a chance to try to catch a wave. But there are certain places where a rip current is basically like a conveyor belt that'll take you out to where you want to go and save you fully half your energy in the process. There's in fact one break near me in San Francisco that is famous for having this particular kind of rip, and it creates this absolutely machine-like pattern. I remember the first time I pulled up in front of this thing, I had never really been to this spot before, and it's a scary-looking spot. There's rocks and it's a cliff, and it just looks funky. And I remember this dude next to me who's already getting into his gear. He's determined he's going to go out, and he's got like tattoos up his neck and into his head. He's really jacked, and he's got this gold grill. And I'm like, this guy's not going to talk to me about the conditions here, but let's try him. And I said to him, like, I've never been here before. Do you have any advice? How does it work? And man, this guy was so nice. He stood up and he was like, oh, let me show you. And he walks me down to show me the rip. In this case, this incredible outgoing rip current that takes you from a spot that it looks like you wouldn't want to be at. You have to walk right to the base of this cliff where the waves are breaking against these rocks. It looks bad. Like, that is not the spot you want to be typically. But he's like, that's where you get in, and then it's going to take you right out to the break, and then you just cut right, north in this case, and get off of it, and then you can catch your wave, catch it in, and you get right back on that conveyor belt. And it's really like this fantastic clockwork thing. And sure enough, he was right. I like get in the water, freezing cold, that first scary moment where you're in, and I am like going right past these rocks that are right there, and I think, this is bad. But sure enough, this rip current takes me right out to where I want to go, and I had a fantastic time in this place. So the reason I'm calling this newsletter The Rip Current is because I think it's the analogy for our moment that we're in right now. I think we're in this place where these big invisible forces have us in their grip. And what I've covered for the better part of 20, 25 years is this convergence of technology, money, politics, human weirdness, right? This sort of, this constellation of manipulation and psychology and greed and, convenience and misinformation, this mess of subjects that I refer to as my beat. And that beat right now is absolutely off the chain, right? I mean, billionaires are on the rise. They're riding this just irresistible tide of power, even though none of them have been voted into office and there's no political accountability on their part at all. Money, it took Taylor Swift almost a decade to earn what Elon Musk currently is earning, on almost a daily basis. And of sort of cultural cachet. We have weirdly given our admiration to these characters who typically get to the top of businesses by exhibiting all kinds of asocial and predatory tendencies, and yet we're adulating them in this weird way where there's these sort of fans of billionaires in a way that I think the founding fathers would have found absolutely nightmarish. So billionaires, right, off the chain. You've got the incredible craziness, and I would say the very sad situation of men, and especially young men in the United States right now, in which their loneliness, their anger, their disappointment, their sexual predilections, their racism, their tribalism, right, all of this stuff is being amplified, grabbed onto and amplified by an online industry that seeks to sort and profit by these attributes. That I think has created a huge problem that needs to be figured out because, as I'll be talking about here and as you'll read in my newsletter, there's a long history of trouble connected to the incredibly powerful moments in history when the dissatisfaction of men, and we can argue here about whether that dissatisfaction is justified or not, but when that dissatisfaction is harnessed for political purposes, for business purposes, it's trouble. And I think we are in that trouble right now. And tech in general, I think, is absolutely transforming our society, at this incredible pace. I mean, if you look at just, the AI revolution alone, that's going to invite huge problems into society. Not least, we, for years in the United States, have put aside the whole issue of nuclear power. Nuclear power has been off the table for decades. Suddenly we are in a position where the richest people in the world are beginning to argue for the need for nuclear power to fuel the incredible electricity demands of AI computing, the computing centers that make AI possible. And, the climate impacts of boiling oceans as we ask for, custom pornographic kitty cat art through AI. The implications of that stuff are going to touch all of our lives in this really fundamental way. So for me, the convergence of all of this stuff is the rip current. It's a set of circumstances that I think are really very difficult to track in the conventional way. They're hard to spot, just like the rip at the beach. But we have to learn how to do it because it's really got us in our grasp. Now, a little bit about me. I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for 25 years. I did about 15 years in magazines and worked for all different kinds, but my most recent one was I was the editor-in-chief of Popular Science magazine. And that was a job that taught me to really feel very optimistic about the future. The future now was our tagline, and our whole thing was that the future is going to be better than it is today, that technology is why we enjoy so many comforts, so many conveniences. The thing I used to say, about technology and optimism is that, if you play that game in your head of like, I want to go back in history and live in another time. And, if you ask somebody about that, they, might say, the Jazz Age or something like that. These tend to be white people because the life in America for non-white people was horrific for a long time. But, let's say, for instance, that I said, okay, I want to go back to the, post-war 40s. I want to be like, living in New York City in the Jazz Age, that would be fantastic. Do you have any idea what dentistry was like in the 1940s? Do you have any idea like how horrific it was to suffer a gunshot wound back then and try and recover from that? The difficulties of healing, the difficulties of going, flying from place to place. I mean, these things were unimaginably more difficult than they are currently. And so, technology, I am fundamentally optimistic about, especially when it comes to things like longevity, healthcare, the rest of it. So I'm not somebody who is naturally pessimistic about it, but I am pessimistic about money. And it was my turn into television reporting as a journalist that really tweaked things for me. Around 2013, I started working at Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera is a fascinating place because it is composed mostly of BBC and some Sky News people, and their way of thinking about tech coverage for me was not, the shiny, optimistic kind of thing that I've been doing for years in magazines. They want to know questions like, what is this new release, of this product going to do to deepen inequality, right? Or how will people who are seeking to, protest going to use technology? So I found myself suddenly doing these stories about, how in Ukraine at that time when they were protesting against what was at the time a very subtle Russian invasion of that country, that was a time when they were using technology to organize and execute protests in these amazing ways, from medieval siege weapons and armor to the use by Russian forces of geolocation on your phone that would tell protesters you are in a protest and being surveilled right now. That was the kind of coverage that I got to do there. And it was an amazing experience. And it taught me a huge amount about thinking about tech not as its own thing, not as a, hard, fast, shiny, exciting kind of, sci-fi object, but instead I learned to do a thing that someone years ago in magazines taught me to think about, which was, what is technology trying to tell us about ourselves? That was fundamentally the question that I got involved in there. And it was this transformative experience. That's how I approached that beat throughout the, whatever it was, 6 years I did at Al Jazeera. And then I had an amazing experience doing a 4-hour documentary series for PBS called Hacking Your Mind. You can still see it on pbs.org or Amazon, other places. And that was a landmark series, basically all about how you and I make decisions and the ways in which human decision making is based on really ancient evolutionary gifts that are also making us very ill-suited for the modern world. And that experience of going around the world and meeting some of the top behavioral scientists in the world totally changed my life. I quit drinking as a result of this. I really changed everything about how I think about my own biases and my foibles and so forth. I just realized after this that so little of the decisions that I make or any of us make are really conscious, creative, rational decisions. So many of our decisions are made on instinct. And at the same time that I was doing that series, I was also learning all about how technology and the companies making it are really acting on that ancient evolutionary circuitry in ways that we don't understand. Even the people who are making these products don't fully understand it. They might have a little bit of a command of it, but they don't really know why it's having the effect it is. And so I was suddenly seeing, all of this incredible science, the last like 30 or 40 years of breakthrough science in behavioral psychology, and then also seeing the forces of capitalism basically trying to build these pattern recognition technologies that would help shape human behavior so that we would, have the most addictive experience possible when we scroll on our phones. And that clash, those two things, suddenly became very urgent in my mind as I began to realize that AI was about to come online, that AI that had been just in the lab and really been just sort of a research project was about to become a commercial product. And so I decided to write a book called The Loop: How AI is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back. It's available. You can listen to the audiobook in my voice if you'd like. But the thesis of that book is that AI is going to specifically confuse our ancient evolutionary systems in a way that's going to make us totally vulnerable to making weird decisions about it. We're going to hand over some of the most basic parts of our decision making and some of the most basic parts of law and our social lives and love and education without even really thinking about it, because our brains are built to take the easy route, to use a shortcut wherever possible, and AI is the ultimate shortcut. That book came out in 2022, and at the time I got some reviewers that said, this is really speculative. And then 9 months later, ChatGPT hit the market, and I was like, oh my God, I should have been so much more speculative. So that then, as that book was coming out, I began working at NBC News. And I did my last 5 years there working for the Today Show and Lester Holt at Nightly News, MSNBC, and the online streaming platform. And that was an incredible experience because I got to take that same lens that I'd learned at Al Jazeera and teach it to NBC. NBC was the kind of place that had mostly been doing sort of, upbeat nerd, shows you the latest gadgets kind of coverage. But pretty soon, I was really proud of myself for having sort of taught them what I was trying to do with tech coverage, and they went for it. It was fantastic. And in doing so, they basically, gave me carte blanche to just sort of, again, look at this question of what is technology trying to tell us about ourselves? And then as AI suddenly comes online, oh man, it never ended. The amount of tech coverage that I could do on that subject never ended. And then, unfortunately, the times have changed, right? And the news business is in real trouble right now. And I was a casualty of budget cuts. They cut me loose in March of 2024. And so suddenly I'm on this path of independent journalism. I don't know that I believe that this is the way forward for everybody. I think an unaccountable group of people with no bosses, just writing whatever they want, doesn't feel to me like a recipe for the best possible things. But I'm going to do my very best in this newsletter to try and abide by the standards that I've been taught. You can go to theripcurrent.com and read my ethics statement. It'll show you all the rules that I try to abide by. And I hope that my 25 years of experience will give me some credibility with you about this stuff. So I'm going to be in this space talking here about, again, everything from, the space travel to weird psychological findings to occasionally the kinds of technology that actually turn me on and make me feel optimistic about the future. All of that's going to be here, and I really hope you will subscribe. I really hope you'll spend some time with me. I have found that this kind of communication is so satisfying because inevitably I learn way more from you than I can ever impart. And if you get into this, if what I'm telling you here, is exciting to you, you might also consider looking at my Substack. That's theripcurrent.com. You can sign up there. It comes out every Monday. I'll have a YouTube video every Tuesday. And I'm going to see where this thing goes. I'm really excited to be with you. I really appreciate your time. And I thank you for watching all the way to the end of an introductory video that is sort of my first foray into YouTube. I'm on TikTok like crazy. You might see me. You'll see me there. I am there. That's been my main social media for a long, long time. But now let's try it out. So thank you so much for being with me, and I hope to see you again soon.